Vincent Castellano, the most feared boss in Chicago, stood frozen outside the living room door, his fingers still carrying the faint scent of gunpowder. On the expensive white carpet, the new housekeeper lay sprawled on her back, eyes closed, her face a mess of blue, red, purple, and yellow. And his children, Luca and Mia, the 8-year-olds the doctors said might never walk again, sat in their wheelchairs, markers in hand, laughing hysterically as if the world had never collapsed. 10 months ago, his wife crumpled in a hail of bullets, her blood staining the asphalt. The children watched from inside the car as their mother died, then took bullets that shattered their own spines. 10 months. 10 months without a single laugh in this mansion. 10 months of Vincent believing he died with his wife, leaving behind only a body that could breathe and kill. And now pure, innocent laughter rang out from the very place he thought had become a tomb. Mary's eyes flew open the moment she sensed a presence at the door. Her gaze landed on the tall figure standing motionless in the doorway, and then dropped to the gun holstered at his hip. Her heart stopped. She scrambled to her feet so fast, she nearly tripped over her own legs, her hands instinctively wiping at her color-smeared face, as if that could erase what he had just witnessed. Her voice came out broken, trembling, barely above a whisper. "Mr. Castellano, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to. The children wanted to play and I thought I lost track of time, please. I can explain." The words tumbled out in a desperate avalanche. Mary's mind raced through every horror story she had heard about this man, how he had made people disappear for lesser offenses, how his enemies were found floating in the Chicago River, how no one crossed Vincent Castellano and lived to tell about it. She had broken the rules. She had let the children play, instead of following their strict therapy schedule. She had made a mess of the expensive carpet. She had laughed in a house where laughter was forbidden. She was going to be fired. Or worse. Mary took a step backward, ready to bolt, ready to grab her small bag of belongings and vanish before he could do whatever men like him did to people who displeased them. But then 2 small hands grabbed her wrists. "Don't go, Miss Ellie." The voice was tiny, desperate, real. Mary froze. She looked down at Mia, whose fingers were wrapped around her arm with surprising strength. Blue marker still clutched in her other hand. The little girl's eyes were wide with panic, not fear of her father, but fear of losing Mary. And then came another voice. "Please stay." 2 words, quiet, almost inaudible. But they hit Vincent like a bullet to the chest. He staggered. Not physically, his body remained rooted to the floor, but something inside him cracked open. Something he had sealed shut 10 months ago, when he buried his wife and watched his children retreat into silence. Luca had spoken. His son, who hadn't uttered a single word since the shooting, who communicated only through nods and written notes, who the therapist said might never speak again due to psychological trauma, had just spoken. For her, Vincent's hand moved slowly to his holster. Mary flinched, squeezing her eyes shut, waiting for the worst. But he simply unclipped the weapon and set it on the hallway table behind him. Then he walked forward, not with the predatory stride of a Mafia boss, but with the hesitant steps of a man approaching something sacred. He lowered himself to the floor, his $1,000 suit pressed against the marker-stained carpet. His knees touched the ground until he was at eye level with his children, something he realized, with a sharp pang of guilt, he hadn't done in months. Vincent looked at the scattered markers, at the chaos of colors, at the ridiculous patterns covering the housekeeper's face. Then he pointed to his own cheek. "Daddy wants to be painted too." Silence. Then Mia let out a shriek of delight that echoed through the mansion like church bells. She grabbed a pink marker and attacked her father's face with the enthusiasm of a true artist. Luca, still quiet, still cautious, picked up a green marker and carefully drew a small star on Vincent's forehead. The laughter returned, doubled, tripled. It bounced off the walls, filled the empty corners, breathed life into rooms that had been suffocating in grief. Mary stood frozen, watching the scene unfold before her. This was not the man she had been warned about. This was not the cold-blooded killer who ruled Chicago's underworld with an iron fist. This was a father broken, grieving, desperate, who had just heard his son's voice for the first time in 10 months. Vincent looked up at her. Their eyes met, and for the first time in 10 months, Vincent Castellano looked at another human being without hatred, without suspicion, without the cold calculation of a predator assessing prey. He looked at her with something that almost resembled hope. "Sit down, Miss Ellie," Mia commanded, tugging at Mary's hand. "We're not finished with you yet." Mary sank back onto the carpet, her legs too weak to hold her anyway. She didn't understand what had just happened. She didn't understand how a game of face painting had cracked open a fortress that therapists and specialists had failed to breach for nearly a year. But as Luca leaned over and added a small blue heart to her cheek, the first voluntary touch he had ever given her, Mary felt something shift in her own chest. Something that felt terrifyingly like belonging. That night, long after the markers had been put away and the children had fallen asleep with smiles still lingering on their faces, Mary sat alone in her small room on the 3rd floor. She touched the blue heart Luca had drawn on her cheek. She hadn't washed it off yet and felt her throat tighten. Belonging. She had almost forgotten what that word meant. 19 years ago, Mary Morgan knew exactly what belonging felt like. She had a mother who sang her to sleep, a father who carried her on his shoulders, a baby brother named Lucas who grabbed her fingers and laughed at everything she did. Then came the night that ended everything. She was 8 years old, standing on the sidewalk in her pajamas, watching firefighters pull 2 body bags from the wreckage of twisted metal that used to be her parents' car. A drunk driver had run a red light. Her mother died on impact. Her father lasted 3 minutes longer. Mary remembered screaming. She remembered reaching for her baby brother, who was crying in a stranger's arms. She remembered a police officer kneeling down and saying words that meant nothing. Everything will be okay, sweetheart. Nothing was ever okay again. The foster care system swallowed them whole. Lucas, only 2 years old, adorable, easy to love, was adopted within 6 months by a nice couple in Michigan. Mary watched them drive away with her brother, his tiny hand pressed against the car window, not understanding why his sister wasn't coming. No one wanted Mary. She was too old, they said, too quiet, too strange. Her first foster family took her in when she was 9. The Hendersons seemed normal at first, a tired-looking woman and her husband who smelled like beer. But normalcy was just a mask. "You eat too much, Mrs." Henderson would snap, slapping the fork out of Mary's hand. "Do you know how much it costs to feed you?" Mary learned to eat less, to take smaller bites, to say she wasn't hungry even when her stomach screamed. When she misbehaved, which meant anything from speaking too loudly to forgetting to make her bed, they locked her in the hallway closet, sometimes for hours, sometimes overnight. Mary learned to be invisible, to move without sound, to survive without being seen. She stayed with the Hendersons until she was 12. Then the system moved her again. The second family was worse. The Martins had a nice house in the suburbs and a foster father named Richard, who smiled too much. At first, he was kind, too kind. He brought her gifts, told her she was special, started coming into her room at night to check on her. Mary knew something was wrong. She felt it in the way his eyes lingered, in the way his hand brushed against her a little too long. The night he finally attacked her, she was 16. He came into her room after midnight, his breath heavy with whiskey, his intentions clear. Mary grabbed the lamp from her bedside table and swung it with every ounce of strength she had. The base connected with his skull. He dropped. She didn't wait to see if he was alive or dead. She grabbed her backpack, climbed out the window, and ran. For 2 years, Mary lived on the streets. She slept in shelters when she could, in alleys when she couldn't. She worked any job that would take her washing dishes, cleaning offices, serving food. She studied for her GED in public libraries and passed on her first try, but the scars remained. She pulled up her sleeve now, staring at the circular burn mark on her wrist, a gift from Mrs. Henderson, who had pressed a lit cigarette into her skin for talking back. Mary always wore bracelets to cover it, always kept her sleeves long. She had survived. That was what mattered. She had crawled out of hell with her own 2 hands, and she had convinced herself that the worst was behind her. Then, 5 years ago, she found Lucas again. And a new kind of nightmare began. Finding Lucas took Mary 3 years of searching through records, filing requests, and hitting dead ends. When she finally tracked him down, he was 14 years old and had just aged out of his adoptive family's care. The nice couple who had taken him from her arms 12 years earlier had divorced when Lucas was 7. Neither wanted to keep him. He bounced through 4 more foster homes before the system finally released him. Mary found him sitting on a bench outside a group home in Detroit, everything he owned, stuffed into a single garbage bag. He was skinny, pale. His eyes carried shadows that no 14-year-old should have. But when he saw her walking toward him, when she said his name, something in those eyes came alive. "Mary," his voice cracked. "Is it really you?" She pulled him into her arms and held him so tight she thought her bones might break. 12 years. 12 years of wondering if he was safe, if he was loved, if he even remembered her. "I'm here," she whispered into his hair. "I'm here, and I'm never letting you go again." They moved into a tiny studio apartment in Chicago. Mary worked 3 jobs waitressing in the morning, cleaning offices in the afternoon, stocking shelves at night. Lucas went back to school. He was smart, smarter than Mary had ever been, and despite everything he had been through, he smiled. He laughed. He made terrible jokes that made her groan. For 5 years, they built something that almost resembled a normal life. Then Lucas collapsed in the middle of his college classroom. The diagnosis came 3 weeks before Mary walked through the gates of the Castellano mansion. End-stage renal failure. The doctor's words had been clinical, detached, as if he wasn't delivering a death sentence. He needs a kidney transplant within 6 months. Without it, his organs will begin shutting down. The cost: surgery, recovery, anti-rejection, medication, follow-up care, totaled $250,000. Mary had already drained her savings paying for dialysis. She had borrowed from everyone she knew. She had sold everything she owned except the clothes on her back. She still owed $180,000. And Lucas was getting worse. The last time she visited him in the hospital, he was hooked up to the dialysis machine, his skin gray, his body shrinking before her eyes. He looked at her with those same eyes she had seen outside the group home 5 years ago, except now they were filled with guilt instead of hope. "Sis," he said weakly, "if it's too expensive, just let me." "Don't." Mary grabbed his hand so hard he winced. "Don't you dare finish that sentence. You're all I have, Lucas. You're the only family I have left in this world. I will find the money. I don't care what it takes." Lucas's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want you to destroy yourself for me." Mary forced a smile, squeezed his hand, and told him everything would be fine. Then she walked out of the hospital room, found an empty stairwell, and collapsed against the wall. The sobs came silently. She had learned long ago how to cry without making a sound. The job offer came 2 days later. The agency woman had been blunt. $15,000 a month. Live-in position. You'll sign an NDA. The children have special needs. What's the catch? The woman hesitated. 7 nannies before you quit within the first week. The employer is difficult, dangerous, some would say. Mary thought about Lucas in that hospital bed, about the clock ticking down on his life. "I've survived hell before," she said quietly. "One more won't kill me." 3 days later, she stood outside the Castellano mansion. The walls were 12 feet high. Security cameras tracked her every movement. Armed guards watched from the gate, their hands resting on their weapons. Mary took a deep breath and walked toward the entrance. Whatever waited inside, she would face it. For Lucas, she would face anything. The first day nearly broke her. Mary had faced hunger, abuse, and nights sleeping in frozen alleyways, but nothing had prepared her for the look in Luca Castellano's eyes when she walked into the children's playroom. He sat in his wheelchair by the window, staring at nothing. When Mary approached with a gentle smile and introduced herself, he didn't acknowledge her existence. She tried again, kneeling down to his level, offering her hand. Luca picked up the bowl of oatmeal on his tray and threw it directly at her face. The warm mush dripped down her cheeks, into her hair, onto her clean uniform. He didn't speak, didn't even blink, just turned back to the window as if she had already ceased to exist. Mia was worse in a different way. The moment Mary stepped toward her, the little girl let out a scream so piercing it echoed through the marble hallways. She curled into her wheelchair, arms wrapped around herself, sobbing hysterically, as if Mary were a monster come to devour her. Mary spent 4 hours that first day sitting in the corner of their room, silent and still, just letting them get used to her presence. Neither child looked at her once. Day 2 brought a different kind of cold. Mary was carrying fresh linens down the hallway when Vincent Castellano walked past. She pressed herself against the wall, lowered her head respectfully, and murmured a quiet greeting. He didn't even glance at her, walked right past as if she were part of the wallpaper. Later that evening, she accidentally overheard a phone call through his study door. "I don't care about excuses." His voice was ice flat, emotionless, terrifying. He betrayed the family. Handle it. Make sure they never find the body. Mary's blood turned cold. She hurried away on silent feet, reminding herself why she was here. Lucas. Think of Lucas. Day 3 brought Carmela Castellano. The matriarch arrived in a black Mercedes, dressed in designer clothes that probably cost more than Mary's annual salary. She swept into the mansion like a queen inspecting her domain, and her eyes landed on Mary with immediate disgust. "So this is the new one?" Carmela circled her slowly, examining her from head to toe. "She looks like she crawled out of a dumpster. Where did you find her? The unemployment line?" Mary kept her eyes down, her voice steady. "I'm here to take care of the children, ma'am. The children don't need someone like you." Carmela sniffed. "Dinner will be served at 7. You will eat in the kitchen. The help does not sit at the family table." Mary ate alone that night, standing by the sink, swallowing cold leftovers while Carmela's laughter drifted from the dining room. Day 4 shattered her heart. It was past midnight when Mary heard the crying. Soft, muffled sobs coming from the children's bedroom. She crept down the hallway and peered through the crack in the door. Luca and Mia were huddled together in Mia's bed, a framed photograph clutched between them. Their mother's face smiled up from the picture, beautiful. Frozen in time, forever young. "Mommy," Mia whispered to the photograph, her voice breaking. "I miss you so much. Why did you leave us? Why didn't you take us with you?" Luca said nothing, but tears streamed silently down his cheeks. Mary pressed her hand against her mouth to keep from sobbing. She understood that pain. She had felt it at 8 years old, standing on a sidewalk, watching body bags emerge from twisted metal. She didn't enter the room. She just stood outside, crying with them in silence. Day 5 changed everything. Mary was alone in her small room, believing no one could hear. The walls were thick. The hour was late. She began to hum a melody her mother used to sing, a soft, gentle lullaby that she hadn't heard in 19 years except in her own memory. Her voice was quiet, barely above a whisper, carrying words of comfort and peace that her mother had once sung to help her sleep. She didn't know that Mia had wheeled herself silently down the hallway. She didn't see the little girl stopped outside her door, head tilted, listening. For the first time in 10 months, Mia didn't cry herself to sleep. Something small and fragile had begun to take root in the darkness of that mansion. Neither of them knew it yet. The breakthrough came in the second week, born from observation and desperation. Mary had noticed how the children reacted every time the physical therapist arrived. Luca would clench his jaw and stare at the wall, refusing to cooperate. Mia would cry before the session even began, her small body trembling with resistance. At first, Mary assumed they were simply being difficult, but then she watched more closely. Every exercise reminded them of what they had lost. Every stretch, every movement drill, every failed attempt to grip an object, it all screamed the same cruel truth. You are broken. You will never be whole again. The therapy wasn't healing them. It was reopening wounds every single day. Mary needed a different approach. The idea came to her while she was organizing the art supplies in the playroom. Markers, crayons, colored pencils, all untouched since the accident. She picked up a blue marker and turned it over in her hands, thinking, the therapist had said Luca needed to practice his fine motor skills. His grip strength had deteriorated. He needed to hold objects, control his movements, rebuild the neural pathways that trauma had damaged. What if he didn't know he was doing therapy? The next afternoon, Mary wheeled both children into the living room and sat down on the expensive white carpet. Carmela would have had a heart attack if she'd seen it. "I have a challenge for you," Mary announced, keeping her voice light and playful. "If you want to color today, you have to hold the marker steady for 5 minutes. And the canvas is—" She pointed at her own face and grinned. "Me?" Luca stared at her like she had lost her mind. Mia's eyes went wide. "Your face?" "My face." Mary lay down on the carpet, spreading her arms out, closing her eyes. "Go ahead. Draw whatever you want, but you have to hold the marker properly, or it doesn't count." Silence stretched for a long moment. Then Mary heard the soft squeak of wheelchair wheels moving closer. She kept her eyes closed, heart pounding, afraid that any movement might break the spell. A tentative touch pressed against her forehead, then another on her cheek. She felt Mia's small hand tremble as the little girl drew something, a circle with lines coming out of it. A sun, maybe. Then came another touch, firmer, more deliberate. Luca. Mary held her breath as he drew something on her left cheek. His hand shook, but he didn't stop. The marker moved in careful strokes, forming a shape she couldn't identify. And then the most beautiful sound Mary had ever heard. A giggle. It came from Mia first, a tiny bubble of laughter escaping her lips as she added more colors to Mary's face. Then Luca made a sound, not quite a laugh, but close, a small huff of amusement as he surveyed his artwork. The giggle became a laugh. The laugh became two. Soon both children were cackling with delight, adding more and more colors, turning Mary's face into a chaotic rainbow masterpiece. Mary lay there, eyes still closed, and felt something crack open inside her chest. When was the last time she had laughed? When was the last time she had felt anything besides fear and exhaustion and the crushing weight of responsibility? She couldn't remember. But lying on that carpet, feeling small hands painting her face with reckless joy, hearing the sound of children's laughter filling a house that had known only silence, Mary smiled, a real smile, the first one in longer than she could recall. She was so lost in the moment that she didn't hear the front door open. She didn't hear the footsteps pause in the hallway. She didn't see Vincent Castellano standing frozen in the doorway, watching his children laugh for the first time since their mother's blood had stained the asphalt 10 months ago. After the face-painting session ended and the children had been cleaned up, Vincent did something that surprised everyone, including himself. "Dinner will be ready in an hour," he said, his voice still rough from disuse. "You'll eat with us." Mary froze in the middle of collecting the scattered markers. She looked up at him, certain she had misheard. "Mr. Castellano, I couldn't possibly, I'm just the help. It's not appropriate for me to, Miss Ellie has to stay." Mia's small hand shot out and grabbed Mary's wrist with surprising strength. "I want her to sit next to me. Please, Daddy, please." Luca didn't speak, but his eyes moved to his father's face with an intensity that said more than words ever could. Vincent looked at his daughter, then at his son, then at the woman kneeling on his carpet with marker stains still visible on her cheeks. His voice softened just slightly, just enough to notice. "Sit, that's not a suggestion." An hour later, Mary found herself seated at the massive dining table in the Castellano mansion, feeling entirely out of place among the crystal glasses and silver cutlery. The chair beside Mia had been pulled out for her, and the little girl beamed as if she had won a great victory. Vincent sat at the head of the table, watching. The meal began in awkward silence, broken only by the soft clink of forks against plates. Then Mia, emboldened by the events of the afternoon, turned to Mary with curious eyes. "Miss Ellie, do you have brothers or sisters?" Mary's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "I have a younger brother." "What's his name?" Luca asked quietly, his first voluntary question to her since she arrived. "Lucas." Mary smiled, though something flickered behind her eyes. "He's 19 now. Is he nice?" Mia pressed. "Is he healthy?" The question hit Mary like a punch to the chest. She set down her fork carefully, buying time, forcing her expression to remain neutral. "He's trying to get better." Vincent's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. He caught the slight tremor in her voice, the way her fingers tightened around her napkin. She was hiding something. Mia, oblivious to the undercurrents, had already moved on to her next thought. She looked between Mary and her father with the innocent, calculating expression that only children could pull off. "Daddy doesn't have a girlfriend," she announced matter-of-factly. "And Miss Ellie doesn't have a boyfriend. Right, Miss Ellie?" Mary choked on her water. I don't, but, so maybe," Mia continued brightly. "Miss Ellie can be Daddy's girlfriend." The silence that followed was deafening. Mary's face turned crimson. She stared at her plate as if hoping it would swallow her whole. Vincent coughed violently, reaching for his glass of wine and draining half of it in one gulp. "Mia," he said, his voice strained. "That's not how." But even as the words left his mouth, his eyes drifted to Mary. He looked at her flushed cheeks, her embarrassed smile, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. He looked at her for 1 second too long, and for the first time in 10 months, Vincent Castellano allowed himself to think about something other than death and revenge. The thought terrified him. He looked away quickly, but not before noticing something else. Mary had barely touched her food. Throughout the meal, she had been subtly pushing portions toward the children, an extra piece of bread to Mia, more vegetables onto Luca's plate. She ate last, ate least, gave everything away as if by instinct. It was the habit of someone who had known hunger, someone who had learned to survive on scraps so that others could have more. Vincent said nothing, but something shifted in his chest, something he wasn't ready to name. The dinner ended with Mia chattering happily about colors and art and all the things she wanted to draw tomorrow. Luca even contributed a few quiet words, and beneath the surface of polite conversation, something fragile and unnamed had begun to grow. The weeks that followed unfolded in small, almost imperceptible shifts. Vincent Castellano had built his empire on discipline and routine. He left the mansion at 7 in the morning and returned at 9 in the evening, sometimes later, depending on which problem required his particular brand of solution. But lately, his schedule had changed. He started coming home at 6, then 5, then 4:30. "Security review," he told Tony when his right-hand man raised an eyebrow. "Need to check the perimeter systems." Tony said nothing, but his knowing look spoke volumes. The truth was far simpler. Vincent had discovered that 4:30 was when Mary took the children to the garden for their afternoon activities. From his study, he could watch through the security monitors as she chased Mia's wheelchair across the lawn, as she helped Luca practice holding a ball, as she collapsed dramatically onto the grass while both children laughed at her theatrics. He found himself smiling at the screen. The realization startled him so badly that he knocked over his whiskey glass. When was the last time he had smiled? He couldn't remember. Mary, for her part, had begun making subtle changes of her own. She noticed that Vincent pushed aside any dish with onions, that he grimaced slightly when the cook added too much spice, that he drank his coffee black, no sugar, and preferred it almost burnt. She started waking up earlier to prepare his breakfast herself. Nothing elaborate, just eggs cooked the way he seemed to like them. Toast that wasn't overdone, coffee brewed strong and dark. She never mentioned it. He never acknowledged it, but he started finishing his plates. The children blossomed under Mary's care. Luca, who had been locked in silence for nearly a year, began asking questions. About books, about the world outside, about things he used to love before his mother's blood stained his memories red. Mia stopped screaming in the night. The nightmares that had plagued her for 10 months grew less frequent, then rare, then almost non-existent. She started sleeping through until morning, sometimes with a small smile on her face. The physical therapist reported unprecedented progress. Both children were engaging with their exercises, their motor skills improving weekly. But Vincent noticed other things too. Mary always wore long sleeves, even when the summer heat made everyone else reach for lighter clothing. She tugged at her cuffs constantly, a nervous habit that drew attention to the very thing she seemed desperate to hide. He wondered what scars lay beneath that fabric. One night, unable to sleep, Vincent walked the darkened hallways of his mansion. As he passed the servants' quarters, he heard something that made him stop, crying, soft, muffled sobs coming from behind Mary's door. He stood frozen, listening. "Hold on, Lucas." Her voice was broken, barely above a whisper. "I'll have the money soon. I promise. Just hold on for me, please." A long pause. More crying. "I won't let you die. I won't. Whatever it takes." The call ended. The sobbing continued. Vincent stood in the darkness for a long time, his hand raised as if to knock, before finally turning away. Who was Lucas? What money did she need? What was she so desperately trying to save? He walked back to his empty bedroom with questions burning in his mind, and something else. Something that felt dangerously close to caring. The next morning, Vincent called Tony into his study. "I want everything on Mary Morgan," he said without preamble. "Where she came from, why she's here, every detail you can find." Tony's eyebrows lifted. "Boss, she's just a nanny. We already did a basic background check before. I don't want basic." Vincent's voice cut like a blade. "I want everything. Birth records, school records, employment history, medical files, everything." Tony hesitated, studying his boss's face for a moment. In 20 years of service, he had learned when to ask questions and when to simply obey. This was not a time for questions. "I'll have it by tomorrow." The file arrived on Vincent's desk the following evening, a thick manila folder containing the complete life story of Mary Morgan. He read it alone, in the dim light of his study, a glass of untouched whiskey at his elbow. Mary Morgan, 27 years old, orphaned at 8 when her parents died in a car accident, separated from her 2-year-old brother Lucas in the foster care system, bounced through 4 different foster homes over the next 10 years. The reports from those homes made Vincent's jaw clench. Phrases like behavioral issues and failure to adjust that he recognized as code for something far darker. 1 arrest at 17 theft. She had stolen bread and medication from a pharmacy. The charges were eventually dropped. A girl starving on the streets, stealing food to survive. Vincent turned the page. Lucas Morgan, 19 years old, currently hospitalized at Chicago Memorial with end-stage renal failure. Diagnosis: 6 months to live without a kidney transplant. Cost of transplant and treatment: $250,000. Current debt: $180,000. Amount still needed: $70,000. Vincent stared at those numbers for a long time. He thought about the salary Mary earned working for him. $15,000 a month. If she saved every penny, never spent a dime on herself, she might gather enough in time. But might wasn't certainty, and her brother's clock was ticking. She sold herself into the wolf's den to save the person she loves. The thought struck him with unexpected force. Vincent had spent his entire life doing terrible things for family. He had killed for them, bled for them, built an empire of blood and money to protect them. And here was this woman, this quiet, stubborn, impossibly gentle woman, who had walked into the most dangerous household in Chicago, endured his mother's cruelty, faced his children's trauma, subjected herself to his own cold indifference. All for her brother, all for love. She wasn't here to seduce him. She wasn't after his money for herself. She wasn't playing any angle. She was simply fighting with the only weapons she had to save the one person left in the world who shared her blood. Vincent closed the file slowly. When he thought of Mary now, he no longer saw the help. He saw a warrior, a survivor, a woman who had crawled through hell and emerged still capable of making his children laugh. Respect was not something Vincent Castellano gave easily. He had killed men who demanded it, had destroyed rivals who thought they deserved it. But sitting alone in his study, holding the broken pieces of Mary Morgan's life in his hands, he felt something he hadn't felt toward anyone in a very long time. Genuine, unearned, absolute respect. The clock read 2 in the morning when Mary slipped out of her room. Mia had woken from a dream, not a nightmare this time, just a restless stirring, and asked for warm milk. Mary had stroked her hair until the little girl's eyes grew heavy again, then promised to bring something to help her sleep. The mansion was silent as a tomb as she made her way down to the kitchen. Moonlight streamed through the tall windows, casting silver patterns on the marble floors. She was heating milk on the stove when she heard the front door open. Heavy footsteps, the click of the security system being reset, then silence. Mary turned and froze. Vincent stood in the kitchen doorway. His suit jacket was gone, his white shirt untucked and rumpled. His tie hung loose around his neck, and there was blood on his vest. Dark, wet stains that glistened in the dim light, splattered across the expensive fabric like abstract art. Their eyes met. Mary's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to pretend she hadn't seen. This was the man the entire city feared. This was the monster in the shadows. This was proof of everything she had tried not to think about. But her feet wouldn't move. Instead, she turned to the sink, wet a clean towel with warm water, and walked toward him. Vincent watched her approach with an unreadable expression. His eyes, cold as steel, hard as granite, tracked her every movement. She stopped in front of him and held out the towel. "For your hands," she said quietly. He looked down. His knuckles were split, smeared with red that wasn't entirely his own. When he looked back up at her, something flickered in those frozen eyes. "You're not afraid of me?" It wasn't really a question, more like a test. Mary met his gaze steadily. "I've been afraid of too many people in my life, Mr. Castellano. I don't have room for more fear." She paused. "Now I'm only afraid of losing my brother." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the ice. He reached for the towel. His fingers brushed against her wrist as he took it and stopped. Her sleeve had ridden up, exposing the circular scar burned into her skin. Mary tried to pull away, but his grip tightened, not painfully, but firm enough to hold her in place. He turned her wrist toward the light, examining the mark with eyes that had seen every kind of wound imaginable. A cigarette burn, old, deliberate, the kind of scar that told a story of cruelty no child should ever know. "Who did this to you?" His voice was low, dangerous, but not directed at her. Mary tugged her hand free and pulled her sleeve down. "It doesn't matter anymore. They can't hurt me now. That's not what I asked, and that's not an answer I'm willing to give." They stood there in the moonlit kitchen, two broken people carrying wounds they refused to show the world. Vincent was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice rougher than before. "From now on, no one touches you in this house. No one." Mary blinked. "Mr. Castellano, no one," he repeated. "Not my mother, not my men, not anyone. You're under my protection now." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to examine. "Why?" Mary whispered. "Why do you care?" Vincent opened his mouth to answer. Nothing came out. He didn't know. He genuinely didn't know why this woman, this quiet, stubborn, impossibly brave woman, had slipped past defenses he had spent years building. He turned and walked away without another word, leaving Mary alone in the kitchen with a cooling pot of milk and a heart that wouldn't stop racing. Something had changed between them tonight, something that couldn't be unchanged. 3 days after the kitchen encounter, Vincent received a call that demanded his presence in New York. A territorial dispute with the Moretti family had escalated beyond what his lieutenants could handle. Blood had been spilled, lines had been crossed, the kind of situation that required the boss himself to resolve one way or another. Under normal circumstances, Vincent would have welcomed the distraction. Business was simple. Business made sense. Business didn't involve confusing emotions or moonlit kitchens or scars that made him want to burn the world down. But as he packed his bag that morning, he felt something unfamiliar gnawing at his chest. Reluctance. He told himself it was concern for the children. They were finally making progress. Leaving now might set them back. He almost believed it. Before departing, Vincent called Mary into his study. She stood in the doorway, hands clasped in front of her, posture careful and professional, but her eyes, those clear, unafraid eyes, met his without hesitation. "I'll be in New York for a week," he said, keeping his voice businesslike. Tony will remain here with a full security team. You shouldn't have any problems. I understand, Mr. Castellano. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small piece of paper, walked around the desk, placed it in her hand. This is my private number. If anything happens, anything at all, you call. Day or night. I don't care what time it is. Mary looked down at the paper, then back up at him. Her fingers trembled slightly as she folded it carefully. Yes, Mr. Castellano. Dom. The word came out before he could stop it. Mary's eyes widened. Call me Dom, he repeated, his voice lower now. When we're alone, a moment stretched between them, fragile, charged, full of things neither knew how to say. Yes, Dom. His name and her voice did something dangerous to his composure. He turned away abruptly. The car is waiting. Take care of my children. The flight to New York felt endless. Vincent called Tony 3 times before the plane even landed. Were the children okay? Had they eaten? Was Mary managing? Tony's increasingly amused responses did nothing to settle his nerves. That night, alone in his penthouse suite overlooking Manhattan, Vincent couldn't sleep. He lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, his mind drifting back to a moonlit kitchen, to a woman holding out a towel without fear, to a scar that told stories of suffering he wanted to avenge. On the 3rd day, he broke down and called the house directly. Mary answered on the 2nd ring. Castellano residence. How are the kids? A pause. Then, warmth flooding her voice. They're wonderful, Dom. Luca spoke 14 sentences today, I counted. And Mia hasn't had a single nightmare since you left. Something loosened in his chest. They made you a drawing, Mary continued. Luca insisted on doing most of it himself. He said he wants to show you the moment you come back. Vincent smiled. Actually smiled alone in his empty hotel room, thousands of miles from home. Tell them I'll be back soon. I will. Silence. Neither hung up. Take care of yourself, Mary. You too, Dom. The call ended. Vincent set down the phone and stared out at the glittering New York skyline. He missed his children. That was natural, expected. But the ache in his chest wasn't just for them. He missed her, and that terrified him more than any rival family ever could. Carmela Castellano arrived on the 3rd day of Vincent's absence, unannounced and uninvited. Her black Mercedes pulled through the gates at precisely 2 in the afternoon, the time when Mary usually took the children to the garden for their activities. The matriarch stepped out of the car with the cold elegance of a cobra preparing to strike. What she witnessed stopped her dead in her tracks. Mia was laughing, actually laughing, as Mary pushed her wheelchair in circles around the fountain. Luca sat nearby, a genuine smile on his face, calling out encouragement to his sister. Faster, Miss Ellie! Make her dizzy! Mary spun Mia one more time, and the little girl shrieked with delight, throwing her arms around Mary's neck when she finally stopped. I love you, Miss Ellie. Mia giggled. Carmela's blood turned to ice. She watched as her grandchildren, the children who had barely acknowledged her existence for 10 months, clung to this stranger like she was their whole world. This would not stand. Mary! Carmela's voice cut through the garden like a blade. A word. Inside. Now. Mary's smile faded. She carefully extracted herself from Mia's embrace, whispered something reassuring to both children, and followed the matriarch into the house. Carmela led her to the formal sitting room, a space designed to intimidate, filled with portraits of Castellano ancestors who seemed to judge from their gilded frames. Close the door. Mary obeyed. Carmela circled her slowly, examining her like a specimen under glass. Where did you come from, girl? What family? I don't have a family, ma'am. Mary kept her voice steady. I grew up in foster care. Foster care. Carmela's lip curled with disgust. So you're nobody. A throwaway child that even the system couldn't place. She stopped directly in front of Mary, eyes narrowing. And now you're worming your way into my son's household, making my grandchildren dependent on you. What's your game? Money? Status? A wedding ring? I'm here to do a job, Mrs. Castellano. Nothing more. Liar. Carmela's hand shot out and grabbed Mary's chin, forcing her head up. I've seen how you look at my son. I've seen how you've manipulated those children. You think I don't know what you're doing? Mary said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence was sometimes the only shield. Carmela released her with a shove. Come with me. She marched Mary back to the living room, where Luca and Mia had been brought inside by one of the staff. The children's faces lit up when they saw Mary, then froze when they saw their grandmother's expression. Fetch me a bucket and a brush. Carmela ordered a passing maid. When the items arrived, she pointed at the marble floor. Get on your knees. Mary's stomach dropped. Ma'am? You heard me. On your knees. Scrub the floor. Let the children see what you really are. Carmela's smile was venomous. The help. Nothing more. Nothing less. Don't forget your place. Mary looked at the children. Mia's eyes were filling with tears. Luca's face had gone pale. Slowly, Mary lowered herself to her knees and began to scrub. "Grandma, stop!" Mia cried, wheeling toward them. "Miss Ellie is our friend." "You can't." The slap echoed through the room. It wasn't hard, Carmela was too calculated for that, but it was enough. Mia's head snapped to the side, her cheek reddening, tears spilling down her face. Luca's hands gripped his wheelchair so tightly his knuckles went white. His jaw clenched. His entire body trembled with suppressed rage. Something inside, Mary snapped. She rose from the floor, slowly, deliberately. Her eyes locked onto Carmela's with an intensity that made the older woman take an involuntary step backward. "You can do whatever you want to me." Mary's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of every injustice she had ever survived. "Humiliate me. Degrade me. I've endured worse from better people." She stepped closer. "But if you ever touch those children again, I won't stay silent. I don't care who you are or what family you belong to. Hurt them again, and you'll answer for it." The room fell absolutely still. Carmela stared at her, speechless for perhaps the first time in her life. Carmela's face contorted with disbelief, then fury. "You dare threaten me?" Her voice rose to a near shriek. "Do you have any idea who I am? I am Carmela Castellano. I built this family when my husband was still running numbers on street corners. I have destroyed people far more powerful than you for far less." Mary didn't flinch. "I know exactly who you are, Mrs. Castellano." Her voice remained steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "You're a woman who just struck an 8-year-old child in a wheelchair. A child who lost her mother. A child who is your own flesh and blood." She gestured toward Luca and Mia, who were huddled together, trembling. "These are the only grandchildren you have left, and you're hurting them." Carmela opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. In 65 years, no one, not rivals, not enemies, not even her own son had ever spoken to her like this. She turned on her heel and stormed out of the mansion, her driver scrambling to open the car door. The moment the Mercedes disappeared through the gates, Tony pulled out his phone. Vincent answered on the first ring. "What? Boss, we have a situation. Your mother came by. There was an incident with the children and Miss Morgan." Silence, then deadly quiet. "What kind of incident?" Tony told him everything. The humiliation, the slap, Mary's confrontation. The line went dead. 3 hours later, hours that should have been impossible given the distance and his schedule, Vincent's car screeched into the driveway. He burst through the front door, still wearing the suit from his abandoned meeting, and stopped cold. Mary sat on the living room sofa, both children curled against her. Mia's face was pressed into Mary's shoulder, her cheek still bearing a faint red mark. Luca had his hand wrapped around Mary's arm, clinging to her even in sleep. They looked like refugees who had finally found shelter. Vincent stood there for a long moment, something cracking open in his chest. Then he moved. Gently, more gently than anyone would believe him capable of, he lifted Mia into his arms. The little girl stirred, whimpering, but he hushed her softly. "It's okay, princess. Daddy's here." He carried her to her bedroom, tucked her in, kissed her forehead, then returned for Luca, repeating the process with the same impossible tenderness. When he came back downstairs, Mary was standing, straightening her rumpled clothes, trying to smooth her disheveled hair. "I should go to my room," she said quietly. "I'm sorry if I overstepped with your mother. I know she's family, and I had no right to." "Why didn't you call me?" The question cut through her apology. Mary looked at him, confused. "What? I gave you my number." Vincent stepped closer, his eyes searching her face. "I told you to call if anything happened. Why didn't you?" "Because I handled it. That's not the point." His voice cracked, actually cracked with emotion he couldn't contain. "You shouldn't have had to handle it alone. Not here. Not anymore." Mary felt tears prick her eyes. "I've always handled things alone. That's how it's always been." Vincent reached out and took her hand. The touch was gentle, almost hesitant, nothing like the iron grip of the man who ruled Chicago's underworld. "Not anymore," he repeated, his voice rough. "You don't have to be alone anymore, Mary. Not here. Not with me." She looked up at him, this terrifying, powerful, broken man, and saw something she had never seen before in anyone's eyes. Sincerity. For the first time in 27 years, Mary Morgan allowed herself to believe that someone was truly, genuinely on her side. A single tear slipped down her cheek. Vincent caught it with his thumb. Neither of them moved away. Neither of them could sleep that night. Mary found herself in the kitchen at 1 a.m, hands wrapped around a cup of tea she wasn't drinking, staring at nothing. The events of the day kept replaying in her mind. Carmela's cruelty, the children's tears, Vincent's words, "You don't have to be alone anymore." She was still trying to believe them when footsteps announced his presence. Vincent appeared in the doorway, barefoot, wearing a simple black t-shirt and sweatpants. Without his suits and his guns, he looked almost human. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. Mary shook her head. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and sat across from her at the kitchen island. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Mary broke the silence. "I should tell you the truth." She took a shaky breath. "About why I'm really here." Vincent set down his glass. "I already know." Her eyes widened. "Your brother, Lucas. End-stage renal failure. $250,000. He watched her face carefully. "I know everything, Mary." She should have felt violated, exposed. Instead, she felt something release in her chest, the exhausting weight of carrying secrets alone. "I'm not after your money, Dom." Her voice trembled. "I'm after my brother's life. He's the only family I have left. He's the only person who ever—" She stopped, tears threatening. "The only person who ever what? Whoever made me feel like I wasn't garbage." The words spilled out before she could stop them. The foster homes, the abuse, the years on the street, none of it mattered when I found him again. He looked at me like I was worth something, like I was his hero. A tear escaped. "And now he's dying, and I can't save him, and She broke off, pressing her hand against her mouth. Vincent moved without thinking. He came around the island and pulled her into his arms. She stiffened. At first she had never been held like this. Not since she was 8 years old, but then something inside her collapsed, and she let herself sink into him. "I keep thinking," Vincent murmured into her hair, "about the day Victoria died. I was supposed to drive them to school that morning, but I had a meeting, a business meeting." His voice turned bitter. "I sent them with a driver instead, and that driver took a different route, and that route crossed paths with men who wanted to hurt me." Mary pulled back to look at him. "Dom, 10 months I've been drowning in guilt. 10 months of wondering if I had been there, if I had driven them instead, if I had just been a better husband, a better father. It wasn't your fault." The words hit him like a physical blow. "You were trying to protect your family," Mary continued softly. "That's all any of us can do. The evil belongs to the men who pulled the triggers, not to you." Vincent stared at her. "You're the first person to say that to me." His voice was barely above a whisper. "And you're the first person I actually believe." His hand rose to cup her face. His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone with impossible gentleness. "What are you doing to me, Mary Morgan?" Her breath caught. "I don't know. What are you doing to me, Vincent Castellano?" The kiss began softly tentative, questioning, as if both were afraid of shattering something fragile. His lips brushed against hers like a whispered secret. Then Mary's hands fisted in his shirt, and she pulled him closer. The kiss deepened, became desperate. Two broken souls clinging to each other in the darkness, finally finding something that felt like home. When they finally parted, foreheads pressed together, breathing ragged, Vincent spoke first. "I love you." The words came out raw, almost wounded. "I didn't think I could love anyone again. I thought that part of me died with Victoria. But I love you, Mary. God help me, I do." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I love you too. God help me, I love you too." They held each other in the moonlit kitchen until dawn began to lighten the sky. Everything had changed. There was no going back now. The hours after dawn brought no peace, only doubt. Mary lay in her small bed, staring at the ceiling, her lips still tingling from his touch. The memory of his arms around her, his whispered confession, his kiss, it all felt like a dream. A dangerous dream. He's Mafia. The thought circled her mind like a vulture. Vincent Castellano wasn't just wealthy or powerful. He was a killer. She had seen the blood on his clothes. She had heard him order men to be handled. She knew exactly what kind of empire paid for this mansion. And she had kissed him, told him she loved him. What would Lucas say if he knew? Her baby brother, lying in that hospital bed, fighting for his life, would he understand? Or would he look at her with disappointment and ask if she had sold her soul for his survival? Am I falling in love? Mary wondered. Or am I selling myself? The question had no easy answer. Across the mansion, Vincent stood before his bedroom window, watching the sun rise over Chicago, his city, his kingdom, his prison. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw two faces, Mary's, soft with love, and Victoria's, frozen in death. Victoria had been innocent. She married him knowing who he was, accepting the dangers, believing his promises of protection, and he had failed her. His enemies had found her, had used her to hurt him, had left his children motherless and broken. If they discover Mary, the thought made his blood run cold. He had already buried one woman he loved. The grave was still fresh, the wound still raw. How could he risk going through that again? How could he paint a target on Mary's back simply by loving her? I can't bury another woman I love. But even as he thought it, he knew the truth. It was already too late. He was already in too deep. The sound of wheelchair wheels broke through his torment. "Daddy!" Mia appeared in the doorway, her face bright with morning energy. Behind her, Luca wheeled himself more slowly, watching with quiet intensity. "Come on, Daddy. Miss Ellie is making pancakes." Vincent let himself be pulled downstairs, where he found Mary at the stove, hair pulled back, an apron tied around her waist. She looked up when they entered, and their eyes met. The air crackled with unspoken words. Mia looked between them with the terrifying perceptiveness of children. Then she grabbed Mary's hand and tugged her toward her father. "Daddy, are you and Miss Ellie married now?" Mary's face turned crimson. Vincent coughed violently. "Mia, that's not I want Miss Ellie to stay." Luca's quiet voice silenced everyone. He rarely spoke, and never about emotions. But now his eyes were fixed on Mary with desperate hope. "Forever," he added. "I want her to stay forever." The kitchen fell silent. Vincent looked at his children, these broken, healing, beautiful children who had found their way back to life through this woman. Then he looked at Mary, whose eyes shimmered with unshed tears. He reached out and took her hand. "I don't know what the future holds," he said quietly. "But I know I want you here, not as a nanny, as family." Mary squeezed his hand, her voice barely a whisper. "Then I'll stay." They chose each other that morning, fully aware that the road ahead was paved with danger. Some choices are worth the risk. News traveled fast in the Castellano family. Within 48 hours of that morning in the kitchen, Carmela knew everything. Her network of informants, housekeepers, drivers, guards whose loyalty could be purchased, reported back with disturbing details. Vincent holding the help's hand, Vincent looking at her like she mattered, Vincent speaking of family. Carmela had not clawed her way from nothing to build this empire, only to watch her son destroy it for some orphan girl with pretty eyes. She made a phone call. 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived at her penthouse. Inside, the complete file on Mary Morgan, compiled by the best private investigator money could buy. Carmela read every page with growing satisfaction. Then she picked up the phone again. "Marco, I'm hosting a family dinner on Saturday. Mandatory attendance. And make sure your brother brings that girl." The invitation arrived like a summons. Vincent stared at the embossed card, his jaw tight. "She's planning something." "I know," Mary said quietly. She had learned to read the tension in his shoulders, the warning signs of danger. "Maybe I shouldn't go. If you don't go, she wins. She'll say you're hiding." He took her hand. "We face this together. Whatever she throws at us." Mary nodded, but dread coiled in her stomach like a snake. Saturday evening, the Castellano estate blazed with light. The dining room had been prepared for 15 guests, Marco and his wife, various cousins and uncles, business associates who were more family than friends. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the long mahogany table. Carmela sat at the head like a queen on her throne. When Vincent entered with Mary at his side, conversation stopped. Eyes tracked them across the room, curious, judgmental, hungry for drama. Marco leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. "So this is the famous nanny. I've heard so much about you." Mary kept her chin high. "I hope some of it was good." "Sit," Carmela commanded, gesturing to 2 chairs positioned directly across from her. Maximum visibility, maximum exposure. The children had been placed at the far end of the table, watched by a maid. Mia kept craning her neck to see Mary, confusion evident on her face. Dinner proceeded with excruciating politeness. Small talk, business discussions, wine poured generously. Then, between the main course and dessert, Carmela struck. She rose from her chair, a manila folder in her manicured hands. The room fell silent. "Before we continue, I believe the family deserves to know exactly who my son intends to bring into our home." Her voice carried the sweet poison of false concern. "Let me tell you all about Mary Morgan." She opened the folder. Orphaned at 8, parents killed in a car accident. No extended family willing to take her in. Carmela's eyes swept the table, ensuring everyone was listening. Raised in the foster care system. 4 different homes, documented behavioral problems. Mary's blood turned to ice. And here's the most interesting part. Carmela held up a police report. Arrested at 17 for theft. She stole food and medication from a pharmacy. She looked directly at Mary. A criminal record. Exposed. The silence that followed was suffocating. Marco laughed a sharp, cruel sound. Well, Vincent's standards have certainly dropped. Murmurs rippled around the table. Contempt, disgust, pity. She has no education worth mentioning. No family. No money. Nothing to offer except Carmela paused meaningfully. Whatever services she provides in private. Mary felt the words like physical blows. At the end of the table, Mia tugged at the maid's sleeve. Why is everyone being mean to Miss Ellie? Luca said nothing, but his small hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. Mary stood there, surrounded by silk and diamonds, by people who had never known hunger or fear or desperation, completely alone. A lamb among wolves. Every instinct in Mary's body screamed at her to run. She could feel the weight of their judgment crushing down on her, the sneers, the whispered comments, the satisfaction in Carmela's eyes. These people had never known what it meant to go hungry, to sleep in alleyways, to choose between food and medicine. They looked at her and saw garbage, but Mary Morgan had not survived 27 years of hell to crumble before a room full of people who had never fought for anything in their pampered lives. She rose from her chair. The movement drew every eye. Carmela's smile widened, anticipating tears, begging. Perhaps a dramatic exit that would prove every accusation true. Instead, Mary straightened her spine and looked the matriarch directly in the eyes. You're right, the two words echoed in the stunned silence. I stole. Mary's voice was steady, clear, carrying to every corner of the room. I stole bread so my brother wouldn't starve on the streets. I stole medicine so he wouldn't die screaming in pain. I did what I had to do to keep the only family I had left alive. She took a step forward. I've been beaten by people who were supposed to protect me. I've been burned. She pushed up her sleeve, revealing the cigarette scar. I've been thrown away like garbage by a system that was supposed to give me a home. Gasps rippled through the room. Marco's smirk faltered. But I have never hurt anyone. Mary's gaze swept across the table, landing on each face in turn. I have never ordered anyone killed. I have never destroyed lives to build my fortune. I have never used my power to humiliate someone weaker than me. Her eyes locked onto Carmela's. Can everyone in this room say the same? The silence that followed was deafening. Mary continued, her voice softening but losing none of its strength. I didn't come to this house looking for a husband. I came looking for a way to save my brother's life. I came willing to work any job, endure any hardship, face any monster, because that's what you do for the people you love. She turned to Vincent, who sat frozen, his eyes burning with an emotion she couldn't name. I don't need your money, Dom. I never did. If you want me to leave, if this is too much, too complicated, too dangerous for your family, I'll walk out that door right now. Her voice cracked slightly. But I won't apologize for who I am. I won't apologize for surviving. For a moment, no one moved. Then Carmela's hand flew through the air. The slap never landed. Vincent moved faster than anyone could track. His fingers closed around his mother's wrist, stopping her palm inches from Mary's cheek. Enough. The single word carried more threat than any shouted curse. He released Carmela's wrist and stepped between her and Mary, facing the room with the cold fury of a man who had killed for less than this. Mary will be my wife. His voice left no room for argument. She will be the mother of my children. She will be a Castellano in name and in truth. Marco opened his mouth to protest. Vincent's eyes snapped to him, and whatever Marco saw there made him sink back into his chair without a word. Anyone in this family who has a problem with that, Vincent continued, his gaze sweeping the table, can leave. Now. No one moved. Carmela's face had gone white. You're choosing her over your own blood? Over your mother? Vincent turned to face her fully. No, Mother. I'm not choosing her over my family. He reached back and took Mary's hand, pulling her to his side. I'm choosing my family, and she is my family now. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Carmela stared at her son for a long, terrible moment. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out of the dining room. The click of her heels echoed like gunshots in the silence. Mary stood beside Vincent, trembling but unbroken. She had won not with money, not with power, not with connections. She had won with the only thing she had ever truly possessed, her dignity. The morning after the disastrous dinner, Vincent did something he had never done before. He went to see someone without any agenda except love. Chicago Memorial Hospital was a place Vincent knew well. He had funded an entire wing through legitimate donations that helped launder less legitimate money. The staff knew better than to ask questions when his black car pulled into the private entrance. Room 417. Lucas Morgan. Vincent paused outside the door, gathering himself. Through the small window, he could see a young man lying in the hospital bed, connected to machines that beeped and hummed with mechanical indifference. He was thin, painfully thin, with the same auburn hair as his sister, and the same stubborn set to his jaw. He knocked once and entered. Lucas turned his head, confusion flickering across his pale face. He clearly expected a nurse or doctor, not a stranger in a tailored suit, with the presence of a predator. "Who are you?" Vincent pulled a chair to the bedside and sat down. "My name is Vincent Castellano. I'm your sister's boyfriend?" Lucas's eyebrows rose. Mary mentioned someone. She didn't mention he looked like he could buy the hospital. Despite everything, Vincent almost smiled. The kid had spirit. "I'm the man who's going to protect her," he said simply. Lucas studied him for a long moment. The machines beeped in the silence. "Do you know how much she sacrificed for me?" Lucas's voice cracked. "She works herself to death. She never buys anything for herself. She visits me every week and pretends everything is fine when I can see she hasn't slept in days." Tears welled in his eyes. "She's killing herself to keep me alive." "I know." Vincent leaned forward. "I've read her file. I know about the foster homes, the abuse, the years on the street. I know she took this job because she was desperate to save you. Then you know she deserves better than more pain." Lucas gripped the bedsheet with trembling fingers. "She's the only family I have. She's the only person who ever fought for me. Please," his voice broke completely. "Please don't hurt her. I'm begging you." Vincent reached out and placed his hand over the young man's frail fist. "I swear on my children's lives," he said quietly, "I will never hurt your sister. And from now on, she won't sacrifice alone." He left the hospital room 20 minutes later with Lucas's tearful blessing and a plan. One phone call cleared $250,000 of medical debt. Another phone call, to contacts whose names would never appear in any legal document, located a compatible kidney donor within 48 hours. By the time Mary made her weekly visit to her brother 3 days later, everything had changed. "Miss Morgan?" The nurse at the reception desk smiled warmly. "I have wonderful news. All outstanding bills have been paid in full, and your brother's transplant surgery has been scheduled for next week. A perfect donor match was found." Mary stared at her, uncomprehending. That's not possible. "I still owe. Everything has been taken care of, ma'am." Mary drove home in a daze. By the time she burst through the mansion doors, her shock had transformed into fury. She found Vincent in his study. "What did you do?" He looked up calmly. "What needed to be done?" "I don't want to owe you." Her voice rose, cracking with emotion. "I'm not something you can buy. Vincent, I won't be your charity case. You're—" He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. "You don't owe me anything," he murmured against her hair. "This isn't a transaction. This isn't payment. This is a gift because I love you, because your brother deserves to live, because you've spent your whole life giving everything to everyone else." Mary's anger crumbled. Sobs racked her body deep, wrenching sobs she had held back for years. "Let me take care of you," Vincent whispered. "Just once. Let someone take care of you." For the first time in her life, Mary let herself be held. The wedding was nothing like what Chicago society expected from a Castellano. No 500 guests. No cathedral draped in flowers worth more than most people's houses. No display of power and wealth designed to remind the city who ruled its shadows. Instead, 30 chairs arranged in the mansion's garden, white roses climbing the simple wooden arch, afternoon sunlight filtering through the old oak trees. It was perfect. Mary stood in the bridal suite, a guest room transformed for the day, staring at her reflection in disbelief. The dress was simple, elegant, nothing like the elaborate gowns she had seen in magazines. Vincent had offered to fly in designers from Paris. She had chosen something that felt like her instead. A knock at the door made her turn. Lucas stood in the doorway, thinner than before, but standing on his own 2 feet. 2 weeks post-transplant, he had been released from the hospital for exactly 24 hours to attend his sister's wedding. "Hey, sis." His voice was stronger than it had been in months. "Ready to get married to a Mafia boss?" Mary laughed through sudden tears. "When you put it that way." He crossed the room and took her hands in his. "I never thought I'd see this day. I thought I'd die in that hospital bed. I thought you'd work yourself to death trying to save me." His eyes glistened. "But here we are, both alive, both free, because of him," Mary whispered. "Because of you." Lucas squeezed her hands. "You saved my life, Mary. You fought for me when no one else would. You survived things that would have destroyed anyone else." He lifted her chin gently. Now go live your life. You've earned it." Mary threw her arms around her brother and held him tight, sobbing into his shoulder like the 8-year-old girl who had watched him being driven away all those years ago. They walked down the staircase together, brother and sister, the only family they had ever known, finally whole. The garden was hushed as they appeared. 30 faces turned toward them, but Mary saw only one Vincent, standing beneath the arch, looking at her like she was the sunrise after an endless night. Lucas placed her hand in Vincent's. "Take care of her," he said quietly, "or I'll find a way to haunt you." Vincent almost smiled. Noted. The ceremony began. The officiant spoke words about love and commitment, about joining 2 lives into one. Then came the moment no one expected. A murmur rippled through the guests. Mary turned toward the sound and her heart stopped. Mia was being wheeled down the aisle by a nurse, tossing flower petals with delighted abandon, her smile bright as the sun. But behind her, Luca was standing, not sitting in his wheelchair, standing, gripping a pair of small crutches, his face set with fierce determination. He took a step, then another, then another. 1, 2, 3, 4. Each step was shaky, uncertain, the product of months of secret practice with his physical therapist. Each step was a miracle that the doctors had said might never happen. "I want to walk." Luca's voice carried across the silent garden, thick with effort and emotion. "Mommy Mary, to Daddy." Mary's hands flew to her mouth. Tears streamed down her face. Vincent stood frozen, watching his son, his broken, traumatized, silent son walk for the first time since the shooting. Something shattered in his chest, and tears spilled down the cheeks of the most feared man in Chicago. No one had ever seen Vincent Castellano cry. Luca reached them and collapsed into Mary's arms, exhausted but triumphant. "Did you see, Mommy? I walked for you." Mary held him tight, sobbing openly, unable to speak. When she finally looked up, Vincent was watching her with such raw love that it stole her breath. "Your vows," the officiant prompted gently. Vincent took Mary's hands. "I thought my heart was dead," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I thought I buried it with Victoria. But you proved me wrong. You didn't just save my children, Mary. You saved me. You brought light into a house that had become a tomb. You brought love where I thought only darkness could exist." Mary wiped her tears and found her voice. "I thought I was born to suffer. I thought pain was my destiny, my inheritance, the only thing I would ever know." She squeezed his hands. "But you taught me that pain isn't destiny. It's just the road that led me to you. Every scar, every tear, every sleepless night, they all brought me here, to this moment, to you. I now pronounce you husband and wife." Vincent pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, tenderly, with the promise of forever. 30 people applauded. But for Mary and Vincent, in that moment, only they existed, 2 broken souls, finally made whole. 3 years had passed since that wedding in the garden. 3 years of healing. 3 years of growth. 3 years of learning what it truly meant to be a family. The Castellano mansion, once a tomb of silence and grief, now overflowed with life. Laughter echoed through hallways that had known only tears. Arguments over homework and bedtime filled rooms that had been empty for so long. The smell of Mary's cooking drifted from the kitchen every evening, drawing everyone to the table like a magnet. Vincent had kept his promise. Slowly, methodically, he had withdrawn from the darker aspects of his empire. The legitimate businesses, real estate, restaurants, construction now took priority. The blood money was being washed clean, investment by investment, until one day his children would inherit a legacy they could be proud of. It wasn't perfect. Some ties could never be fully severed, but he was trying. Luca was 11 now, tall for his age, walking with forearm crutches that he had decorated with stickers of his favorite superheroes. He was in 6th grade, top of his class in science, determined to become a doctor one day. "I want to help kids like me," he told anyone who asked. "Kids who think they'll never walk again. I want to show them miracles are possible." Mia remained in her wheelchair. Her spinal damage had been more severe than her brother's, but she had made peace with it in a way that humbled everyone around her. She had discovered art, spending hours with her markers and paints, creating vibrant worlds on canvas. Her dream was to become an illustrator, to fill children's books with the colors that had once covered Mary's face. Lucas had graduated from the university last spring. He was healthy now, strong, working as an intern at a nonprofit that helped foster children find permanent homes. He lived in the east wing of the mansion, Vincent had insisted, and Mary had cried with gratitude, and Mary herself. She stood in the garden now, one hand resting on her swollen belly, watching the children play. 7 months pregnant with her first biological child, a girl, the doctors said. A sister for Luca and Mia. A new chapter in a story that had already contained more pain and joy than most people experienced in a lifetime. The sound of a car made her turn. A black Mercedes pulled through the gates. Mary's heart tightened as she recognized the passenger. Carmela Castellano stepped out, older now, her hair completely silver, her posture still proud but somehow softer. They had not spoken since the wedding, 3 years of silence, broken only by birthday cards sent to the grandchildren with no return address. Mary walked toward her, uncertain. Carmela stopped a few feet away, her eyes sweeping over the garden, over Luca practicing with his crutches, over Mia painting at her easel, over Lucas tossing a ball with one of the security guards who had become more friend than employee. Then her gaze landed on Mary's pregnant belly. "I was wrong about you." The words came out stiff, reluctant, but real. Mary blinked. "Mrs. Castellano, I thought you were weak, a nobody, a threat to everything I had built." Carmela's jaw tightened. "But you're stronger than I ever gave you credit for. You took a broken family and made it whole again." Mary considered her response carefully. "I learned to be strong from circumstances," she said quietly, "from being knocked down and having no choice but to get up again. Just like you did, ma'am. We're not so different." Something flickered in Carmela's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. She gave a single nod. Not an apology. Not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. It was enough. That evening, the family gathered in the living room, all of them together for the first time in 3 years. Carmela sat in the corner, watching, slowly thawing in the warmth she had tried so hard to destroy. Mia wheeled herself to the center of the room, a box of markers in her lap. "Mommy," she said, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Can I color your face? Like old times?" Mary laughed, a sound that still surprised her sometimes, even after all these years. She lowered herself carefully onto the white carpet, the same carpet where everything had begun, and lay back with her eyes closed. "Go ahead, baby. Make me beautiful." Luca abandoned his crutches and scooted over to join his sister. Even Lucas grabbed a marker, grinning like the 14-year-old boy Mary had found on that bench so long ago. Vincent stood in the doorway, watching, the scene before him blurred as memories flooded back. He remembered standing in this exact spot 3 years ago, fresh from violence, fingers stained with gunpowder, heart dead in his chest. He remembered seeing a woman on this carpet, face covered in colors, making his children laugh for the first time since their mother's murder. He had thought he was seeing madness. He had been seeing salvation. "Dad?" Luca's voice pulled him back to the present. "Do you remember the first time you saw Mom on this carpet?" Vincent smiled, a real smile, the kind he had forgotten how to make until Mary taught him again. "I thought I was seeing a ghost," he said softly. "Turns out, I was seeing my future." He walked over and sat down beside his family, allowing Mia to attack his cheek with a purple marker. Carmela watched from her chair, something suspiciously like tears glistening in her eyes. Mary opened her eyes and looked at the people surrounding her. Luca, the silent boy who had taught her that patience could heal any wound. Mia, the frightened girl who had taught her that joy could bloom in the darkest places. Lucas, the brother who had taught her that fighting for love was always worth the cost. Vincent, the dangerous man who had taught her that even monsters could learn to be gentle. And the baby growing inside her, a promise of tomorrow, of hope, of a future she had never dared to dream. She whispered to herself, so softly that only her own heart could hear. Family isn't where blood ties you. It's where love chooses to stay, even when everything falls apart. Dear friends, we have come to the end of this emotional journey. This story teaches us that no matter how dark our past may be, no matter how many scars we carry, love has the power to heal all wounds. Mary showed us that strength doesn't come from having an easy life. It comes from surviving the hard one and still choosing to be kind. Vincent reminded us that it's never too late to change, never too late to open our hearts again. The most important lesson? Family is not defined by blood. Family is defined by those who stay when times get tough, who hold your hand in the darkness, who choose you every single day. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss our daily uploads. Give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear this message today. We would love to hear from you. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever experienced a love that transformed your life? Have you ever found family in unexpected places? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and your stories inspire us to keep creating content that speaks to the soul. Thank you for being part of our community. Thank you for letting us share these moments with you. We wish you good health, happiness, and peace in your daily life. May you always find love in unexpected places and strength in difficult times. Goodbye for now, dear friends. Take care of yourselves and each other. See you in the next video.